And now the floor will open up for the academic point of view, and therefore I'm welcoming Dr. Jeff DeGraff from the University of Michigan. He is well known as the Dean of Innovation, definitely a reference when it comes to how to train innovation, but not on paper, of course. It's about doing it. It's a lot to say. As General Loving was mentioning before, he's involved in training NATO personnel on innovation, and he will now, I hope, be able to give you a few more clues about it. Don't forget that you can ask questions. There is a Q&A chat box on the side of your screen, and so we will be able to take a few questions after this for Jeff. Thank you so much. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Serge. And I also want to thank General Levine for his support of all this. Welcome, NATO Innovation Network. Let me get my pitch up here for you. 1 second here. Okay. All right. Well, I want to start with the facts of the case. And that is, if you start looking at the top 100 universities in the entire world, overwhelmingly, they're either in NATO or they're NATO friendly, right? So the great research of the world basically is within your grasp. I also want you to think about capitalized value of companies. And this is from the Wall Street Journal. It turns out, once again, that almost 9 out of 10 of the most valuable companies in the world, particularly tech companies, I think it's even more so with tech companies, are actually within the grasp of NATO. So basically the elements that we need to make innovation happen, research and technology, are all around us. But that begs an interesting question if you're a business school professor. It begs the question of, if we're smarter and richer and more advanced than other countries, and incidentally, I spent a lot of my career in China, so I'm pretty familiar with that. I've been in over half of all the Fortune 500 companies at the executive level. Here becomes the question: how can we be failing or falling off the pace of our peer adversaries? So one of the real interesting thought forms I want to start with is, we believe that the enemy right now are these other countries, when in fact, as the old cartoon Pogo used to say, we have met the enemy and he is us. If we have this embarrassment of riches and we have the best research, then the problem can't be someone else. The problem has to be us. So let's take that on. So I built a series of courses and workshops, but most importantly, applied the kind of stuff that I've done over the years with Google and Apple and those kind of places, with the military, particularly the U.S. Air Force, called Aim High. Academia, industry, military, hybrid innovations. It's what you're calling open innovation, and I'm delighted to hear it. I think, I'm preaching to the converted here. So we're going to have to enlist the academy, and we're going to have to enlist businesses. And this is all going to happen through a mindset, not through a bunch of protracted processes, but about thinking about this quite differently. Now, we have to start with the basics about innovation. And the first thing is, innovation is a convex form of value. It means it pays in the future. It's often event driven, right? It's often not sort of programmatic. Go think about your plans in 2019. There was that little virus. We had a chip shortage in 2020. We had insurgents in my country in early 2021. We had a Russian invasion, as General Levine had said, that most people had not planned up. But here's what I need you to think about. Almost every one of these issues you could read about in Thucydides or Herodotus. These are old things that happen, and yet we overlook these events to our own peril, and we do it all the time. Industry does it all the time. So we're going to have a way of thinking about this in real time to be far more agile than we are now. Agile like a tech company or like a biotech company. I want you to think about innovation for a moment. In 1992, I got to write the definition for the United States government for this. It's been changed a bunch of times, but now it's kind of going back to this. Innovation is just useful novelty. That's all it is. But I want everybody to understand something, and that is, innovation is a form of positive deviance. positive deviance. And that becomes part of the real sticking point of where the military has problems, because the whole idea is not to deviate. But innovation, by definition, is a form of positive deviance. Now, I love this quote, the old Schopenhauer, the crazy-haired German idealist. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. And that's part of our problem. We're not able to see in a different way. So what I'm going to introduce is something that I'm well known for, called the Competing Values Framework, or the Innovation Code, or the Innovation Genome, whatever you're reading. But it really requires prismatic thinking. And just like General Levine said, that's going to require diversity of mindset, diversity of talent, diversity of areas. So how are we going to think around this prism? Well, it basically comes down to there are 4 approaches. Now, this is not a Myers-Briggs test. This is actually used in predicting share prices, right? So this is the kind of stuff that you see in ETFs. It's the stuff in my world where businesses don't innovate to innovate. They innovate to make money. And in your world, you innovate in order to defend your countries, in order to keep your military elite and have superior abilities over your enemies. So there are basically 4 approaches to this. There's the create approach, and I'll take you through this. We call this the forward position. There's the engineer or the control approach, the aft position. There's the compete approach, which you see a lot in America. This is the ugly Americans, right? Sorry, mea culpa, mea culpa. And then, of course, there's the collaborate approach, which we see much more in our children, and we see it in East Asia. But I'm going to take you through these by starting with the whole idea of this approach is that conflict, as long as it's constructive, we don't have prejudice, we treat people with great respect, but we challenge ideas. And innovation is the product of constructive conflict. The death of innovation is not conflict, it's apathy, it's over-alignment. Over-alignment's great if you're trying to get quality. If you're trying to get innovation, it's probably the worst thing you could do. Now, let's talk about the power of constructive conflict. There are 2 basic tensions that every innovator has to ask themselves. The first one is, how much innovation are we looking for? Right? How much innovation are we looking for? Are we looking for a lot of innovation, radical innovation with a lot of risk, or little innovation, very little innovation with scale? The second is how fast. How fast we need to move. And certainly the situation in the Ukraine has challenged that. And that becomes the issue. Do we go really fast and do something amazing, or do we spend our time and develop capability? Now, I worked on the COVID vaccine, and that was a great example. That should be your benchmark, 8 years to 8 months, 8 years to 8 months. That's what happens when you spin up the whole idea of how we attack this program, right? How we attack this problem. Now, there's going to be 3 levels to this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. There's the personal level, what you do as a leader. There's the level of what goes on in organizations. And of course, there's the world, the strategic level that doesn't really care what we do. That's the world where, stuff happens, where we have diseases, et cetera. So I wanted to use an industry that I thought would make clear what's going on, I think, and how to think about this in the military. And the first industry I thought of was automobiles. So here I am in the north. I'm 40 miles from Detroit. One of the big things that's happened recently, of course, is autonomous vehicles. If you know anything about Waymo, that started here in the little city that I live in. And it's about a $500 billion industry between here and we think in 2030. This is an industry about uniqueness, breakthrough, it's gadgety. It's the kind of innovation most of us fall in love with. The kind of people who run this are Steve Jobs, who when I was a young man, was an advisor to, or now Elon Musk, who's a very interesting, let's say, controversial figure. And there's a lot of people in other countries around the world and other diverse kinds of people that are doing this. So this is what we're going to call the forward of the crate position. It's held together by vision. Now, I want you to think about the opposite of this. The opposite of this, in order to make autonomous vehicles work, we're going to need smart cities. And smart cities really mean we have to be predictable, get to scale. We're going to have a lot of hierarchy. This is what we're going to call the control position or process. And this is about $1 trillion industry. So this industry is about twice the size of the autonomous vehicle industry. Now, the first point I want to make is there is no autonomous vehicle industry unless there's a smart city industry. You have to have one to go with the other. And this is what people often overlook when they think about innovation. So we're going to call one the forward position and one the aft position. And these are not just style issues. Think about it. To create quality, you eliminate errors. To create innovation, you have to go through errors. So these are actually competing values. This is the first question of how much innovation. Now, I want you to think about another industry that's related to what's going to go on with the automobile industry, and that's fintech. And we think fintech's about $1.5 trillion. So you see, we're going up $0.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion. And this is held together by goals. So these are typically contentious situations like warfare, like football. It's very market driven about speed, and it's very much driven by the notion of how am I doing against someone else. Very fast, not very sustainable. This is the US stock market. This is the United States culture, at least in my generation, boomers. But then I want to put this together, how all four go together, because there's an interesting thing that we often overlook. And that's what I'm going to call the collaborate position, or the position that's held together by values. And when we look at this position, what we start to realize is that by 2030, we believe that the people who drive a car, who have a driver's license, will be between 25 and 30% less than now. So what I want you to get is, here we are building all these tiers and feeling very good about it, but the automobile industry, for all practical purposes, is going to collapse. Because when these cars are on the road all the time, you use your car about 12% of the time, the notion is the amount of car sales is going to collapse. It's going to create a secondary issue with employment. It's going to create all kinds of issues with the economy. I'm still an advisor to the Federal Reserve here in the United States, right? So the notion is we typically fall on one of these categories, and we fall in love with our mindset for it. But our blind spot is the one that's going to kill us. And I also want to point out that in my generation, this collaborative mindset is also the mindset of my children and the generation that comes behind me. So that when I start looking at how people recruit, et cetera, I think there's a real problem. Now, this is the mindset of how fast. The tension of going fast but not sustainable, and the tension of being sustainable but not going fast. Now, here's the point. You need all four to create constructive conflict. Stop falling in love with gadgets. I have a PhD in a technology area. I worked on one of the first supercomputers in the world, right? And what I find are gadget heads, right? They fall in love with technology. Do you think that the non-NATO competitors are not going to have toys? Is the next generation going to be all about toys? It's not. It's going to be about thinking differently. And boy, the Ukraine has shown us that. You have to understand that the way in which you think about this will determine what kind of innovation you have. My favorite quote of all time is, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. I hope you're full of doubts. Now, of course, the challenge of this is crossing boundaries. So at the beginning of the forward position, the green position, there's a lot of failure and a lot of spreading out or hedging. As you move through the middling position, the problem becomes going fast and the tension of getting the right people. And finally, when you get to the F position, or the red position, it's about optimization. So you can't just run one innovation program. One size never fits all. And what is the right innovation person never works. It's going to require a village, as General Levine had said. Now, there's a few things you can do to make this work. First of all, assemble a diversity of perspectives. Stop surrounding yourself with yourself. The people who like what you're doing are not that helpful. 2, engage in the conflict, meaning in a constructive way, what works and what doesn't work, and be honest. Overly optimistic innovators are the first ones dead. Innovators have a sense of destiny, but they also are realists. Establish a shared vision or goal. It's hard to do, and boy, that's the key part about what you're doing at the NATO Innovation Network. That's the power. And finally, constructing hybrid solutions with the academy, with academia. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want you to know, when we start looking at what we are going to call creativity clusters, overwhelmingly, those areas that are more diverse, and in my country with more immigrants, those overwhelmingly outproduce innovation than those that are more hegemonic. Interestingly enough, out of the 25 scientists that developed the COVID vaccine in this country, 24 were not born here, and the other one was a first-generation American. Now, I do want to talk very quickly about a dynamic. One of the problems that I see big organizations have is they try and launch innovations in the middle. It never works. And the reason is the middle of the bell curve is designed to converge. It's designed to eliminate variation. I want you to think about when people really change. or when companies change. I was an advisor to Apple for years. In 1997, Apple was trading below $5 a share. It's the first trillion-dollar company. And the reason people change when they're in a crisis is the risk of trying something radical and the reward of staying where you're at is reversed in a crisis. It doesn't matter whether you're a person, Apple, or the Ukraine. The notion is more radical innovations are going to happen at the edges. That's why non-state actors are so dangerous. It's also going to happen when you're on a roll, when things are going really, really well, when you're, Uber or your Tesla. Something is going very well. Same thing, risk and reward is reversed. Innovation doesn't move inside out. It moves outside in. And this is a fundamental problem in a lot of these programs. Now, this is sometimes called Schumpeter's scale. Schumpeter was a famous European professor, ended up teaching at Harvard, and it goes like this. My model on Schumpeter's model. This is the wrong colors, but you'll get the idea. Organizations typically start, it should be green, in the create position. They're entrepreneurs. Then they go to the blue position where they try to make money and move fast. Then they go to the yellow position or the collaborate position where they try and engage with each other. And unfortunately, the only right color on this slide, my apologies, is the control color, where now all of a sudden the bureaucracy kicks in. And of course, General Levine had talked about this as well. So this becomes an important piece. But Schumpeter says that we are not defeated by our enemies. Schumpeter says Adam Smith is wrong. Schumpeter basically said something radical. He said the seeds of our undoing are sown at the pinnacle of our success. And what Schumpeter's scale means is it means that the people who typically destroy us are us, not someone else. So in times of great change, innovation isn't your best friend, it's your only friend. Take a higher point of view. If you're a gadget head, look around social issues, so on and so forth. Leave room for the stuff you don't know now. Innovation is iterative. It's a work in progress. It's not about how. Let's stop focusing on how, because we're going to learn about how as we go along. I write a lot of books about this and TV a lot, all that stuff. It's about who. Are you actually changing how you staff, how you promote, who you recruit into the Air Force to get some of these who's, right? And not just the Air Force, NATO, the Army, whatever's going on in France and all of Eastern Europe, etc. And it all starts with an innovator mindset. You have to have an innovator's mindset. Now, most importantly, I want to thank you for all that you do, because you do some amazing stuff for us. So I'm going to kick off now. I'm going to turn it back over to Serge. I think I went a couple minutes over. I don't know if there's time for questions. I'll leave it to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That's great. And definitely there is time for questions. There is a lot of activity in the chat boxes. And I would like to ask you some question that I interpret from what is said there, just to extract the academic portion of it so that you stay in your lane, all right? So, of course, when you talk about innovation and we follow what you have been recommending right now in your presentation, some people will say it looks nice, but government, the military, NATO is basically a bureaucratic organization, and that's nice words to throw, but will that change? And my question would be, do we need to change everything? What's the relationship between, let's say, traditional ways existing that are still justified and a new wave of innovation? How to blend those two things?
I think there's three answers to it. Number one, I want to go back to the bell curve. Look at the Ukraine. There's a lot of stuff that can be done off menu and needs to be done off menu, particularly when you're in a crisis. Nobody does it when everything is perfect, right? So in a crisis, an organization is more likely to try stuff because the resistance will go down. Number two, the whole point of this meeting, Serge, that I'm so excited about is that innovation is not going to be a bunch of processes. It's going to be people. That's how the academic world works. The notion is we go to conferences, we went to school together, we do research together. And what happens with business, our students who are business students come in and we build things together. So it's the informal network that actually produces a lot of the results, whether you're in the academy or whether you're in a business. The final thing is pretty simple, which is you don't have to change the whole system. You just have to change small bits of it. You have to create pathways for innovation. You have to allow that small startup person to actually get a contract with the Pentagon or whatever it is in your country. And most of those systems are really gamed towards your primes, the whole idea of prime. And in this way, to me, the part that does need to change is that the military, when I look at these militaries around the world, and I'm familiar with many of them, they look like General Motors in the 1960s. You have 5 big primes, and that's where most of your money goes. And then you wonder why you don't have innovation. Well, you've locked out of the process the smaller person. So rather than change everything or push the primes out, because you can't do that, the notion is, what is path B? So start in a crisis, look at who creates networks informally, and create small rivets for path B. It's the same thing that big companies do in ecosystems. I've been doing this for 30 some years, and it works. Innovate at the edges.